Good morning and good evening for my guest, Jenna Tiffany from Let's Talk Strategy. This is Dr. Matthew Dunn, host of the Future of Email Marketing, and my guest, as I already said, is Jenna Tiffany. Jenna, hi. You're talking to me from where?
I'm actually in Lisbon, Portugal.
Nice.
So
I've not been there.
a sunny place in Europe,
Uh,
much sunnier and warmer than London, I'm told, on a regular basis.
has it been a bit? Has it been a bit rainy, drippy this season in London?
Yeah, from what my family have told me, it's pretty wet. It's a pretty wet May, although actually it's been pretty wet here as well for the season. So
How long?
a little bit more rain than normal.
How long your stay? How long so far in Portugal for you?
I've been here now throughout the whole of the pandemic, so pretty much
Oh, have you?
15 months.
Wow. Okay, I did not realize that. Somehow I was thinking because you're sort of your brand, if you will. I was thinking you were still in the UK, but wow. How is Portugal faring? We'll get on to email and marketing in a second, but how's the country faring in terms of lockdowns and so on?
Yeah, pretty well. We came out. So normally, what I would do outside COVID times is spend 6 months in London, 6 months in Portugal, and I normally travel quite a lot across Europe, in the States, speaking and meeting clients and things. Obviously, COVID then hit. We stayed in Portugal, and was quite a strict lockdown for the best part of the year, really. And you couldn't leave your local village. You couldn't. There was some instances where you had a rule not to leave your house unless it was really essential. And it's still fairly strict now, where you need to wear a mask everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's written into law, and you need to wear a mask on the beach, for example, and things like that.
Yeah.
But things are opening up, and there's a little bit more optimism. I think the only challenge here in comparison to England is that Europe is very far behind in the vaccine program, and that's holding back a lot of things, whereas England is really far ahead, and all my friends are getting their vaccines, and I'm just sitting here waiting.
You're waiting, not vaccinated yet, huh?
Yeah, still waiting. Yeah, so maybe June, July is the current timeline for my age group.
Okay. Well, we went from diddling around to catching up on that surprisingly rapidly. Thank you, Joe. In the U.S., and I actually ended up vaccinated, although many of my friends were a month or two ahead of me, just age or profession brackets. And it's I got to tell you, not everybody's immediately like, great, I'm vaccinated, back out on the street. The psychological readjustments are much more complicated than just it's flu season now, it's not kind of sensation. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's interesting that you say that, actually, because I was having a chat with someone today, and it was their first time they'd gone into central London. And they said they felt really apprehensive getting on public transport, being around people again, and the whole situation just felt really strange. I think we'll all feel like that for quite some time. It's quite a shock to the system, and it's quite a shock mentally to be so confined to then be let out again, almost effectively.
And sort of muscle habit of keeping distance, or mask on the face kind of stuff. It is going to be very. It's not going to be hard. It's going to be different. We're not going to behave the same way a year from now that we did 2 years ago, I don't think.
No, and it's funny how when initially putting a mask on felt really strange, whereas now it feels weird if you don't put one on, and it's weird, that adjustment. But we have some friends in New Zealand, and life for them has not changed. And I think it's so strange. So our headspace is in such a different place in comparison to those countries, and that's really weird as well. I think that when everybody can go back to traveling again, that's going to be a really weird mix of people that have gone through this scenario, and those that actually haven't had such a strict lockdown.
And we're not we're a ways from that mix, and then we'll all be talking and writing about it for, I think, years to come. My macro, and this is my clumsy pivot to talk about marketing and email more. macro, it does seem to me that we got our butts booted 5, 6, 7 years at least forward in terms of adoption to digital, change in the workplace, change in the way we inform ourselves, work, play, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a couple of things. I think really like the not that the level of professionalism has changed, but I think that whole concept of, we're dialing in from our houses, you get to see a more personal insight into somebody.
That's true.
I think the whole kind of polished off image and the pressure to deliver on that, I think has changed. And I think that's a good thing. I think that opens a lot more opportunities for people and gives a lot more of a relaxed environment. And I think that's a nice working culture to be in.
Yeah.
I think the other part is it's given a lot of businesses, almost like you said, a kind of almost like a kick.
Yeah.
So for those that were maybe putting off those foundation settings, those were thinking, oh, digital's not for me, I don't need it.
Yeah.
It's given a real kind of push to actually sort those problems out and be able to offer both.
Yeah.
And whilst, yes, it's a real big challenge for those organizations that weren't ready to pivot as quickly as others, it gives them now a massive opportunity to grow and develop and expand that further. And I think that's one of the good things to come out of the situation.
Yeah. I think so as well. I was reading that at least one school system was reading about it in the U.S. One school system said we had a 10-year plan to start, making classes available online, and we had to execute it in 2 weeks. And I'm thinking there's companies in about the same boat.
Yeah, of course. I also teach as well, and I've always taught online. Yeah, and I've taught online for nearly 4 years now. But there were teachers that had never taught online, that had their children at home, didn't really have the setup, and were trying to not only handle new technology, but also trying to, change your lesson that is normally in person to being online, using a tool that you haven't used before with students that also aren't really used to being taught online.
Yes.
And that was a big challenging area. I think there's a lot of scope though to make that experience much better. I think there's a big opportunity in education to actually improve that. And I've seen lots of conversations and lots of technology startups, and I've actually worked with a few that are really trying to improve that experience for both the teacher and the student. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think there's a few industries where it's been really disruptive.
Yeah, education certainly among the mix. I actually come from a family of educators, like third or fourth generation. My siblings, their husband, everybody's a teacher, and they're exhausted. I have to say, right now, tail end headed into summer, they're just like, give me a break, because the fatigue of that adaptation for not just them but all of their students and the institution as a whole. I think it's been quite overwhelming. And those of us in the digital space, you probably worked more like this for years, right? This is not as new for you. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I don't feel it's been a major change professionally. It's been a major change communicating with family.
Yes. Yeah.
And just so much more screen time, because we live and breathe this every day.
Yeah.
A lot of my family don't, they're not necessarily on their computers all the time, or now they are, but they weren't previously.
Right. Yeah.
And then, you're having FaceTime conversations in the evening, and it feels like 24/7 you're looking at a screen.
You're looking at a screen. Yeah, absolutely.
So that screen fatigue is real.
My wife works for the school system here, and last spring, so over a year ago, they did that, the incredibly fast pivot. Okay, we got to do all of this on pick your platform, Zoom or whatever. And I remember in the first few weeks to a month, as she started adapting to it, she was saying, I'm exhausted. Like, I'm just exhausted. And I've been at this long enough, and frankly, it's my field anyway, digital media. And I said, for one thing, you're looking at that little tiny Mac notebook screen. And all I did was put a big monitor on the desk and plug it. I said, make the faces bigger and your fatigue's going to go down by at least a bit. I'm not saying it's going to be the same as being there. And it really, that alone made a difference in her level of fatigue. But then you get 24 people in a meeting and they're all postage stamp size, and your brain is back there trying to sort out the facial cues and the body language, and you're exhausted again.
Yeah.
Right? We'll all end up with wall-sized monitors out of Arthur C. Clarke or something like that.
I think we will, like where they've got the Star Trek and the huge monitor screens.
Yeah, and I'd hang one in my office here in a heartbeat. Okay, so now let's actually pivot and talk about marketing. So congratulations, you just published a book.
I did.
Marketing strategy.
Yeah, marketing strategy. It was a long road to get to publish stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned something like 3 years when I was asking if you'd be a guest, and come and talk with me. 3 years, and I'm more than that to think about it. Obviously, why'd you start? What got you going there?
Great question. So it was 3 years from the initial idea, and my passion for it and my driving force for it was because I feel that in the marketing industry, we have a real misconception and misunderstanding between the difference of strategy and tactics.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this in businesses, I see this in marketeers, I see this in C-suite, I see this in students. And I just thought, if I'm really going to solve this problem, or I really don't want to get frustrated with having to constantly explain the difference or see it being misrepresented, then I need to do something about it. And the idea of the book was born.
Okay.
And that's kind of how it started. And then I was lucky enough to get a publisher on board.
Wow.
And that adds a whole nother level of complexity.
I'll bet.
Yeah. So I think my biggest kind of challenge with writing the book was I really wanted to create a strategy framework that not only made it really simple to be able to create a strategy or review an existing strategy, but also to be able to see that difference between a strategy and tactics. Okay. And that's the bit that I spent a lot of time on, to try and get it into a format that was practical, could be used and could be remembered. And for me, I didn't want the book to be a stuffy textbook that's just shoved into a drawer and never used again. Yeah. Because we've all read those. I wanted it to be a practical handbook, so that if a marketeer is about to review a particular campaign, they can go to a particular section of the book. And there's lots of tasks and notes areas in there as well. Or if they're starting out from the beginning, it's like a clear structure of, okay, these are the steps I need to take to get to where I want to get to. And yeah, that was my main stimulus, really, to solve that problem.
So it's not going to be the same as reading the book, and my copy's wending its way from Amazon. And I've been reading some of you've got some rave reviews and some amazing testimonials before the reviews even start. So I'm really pumped to get it. But if you're having a coffee conversation with a young marketer and trying to get them to think about the difference between strategy and tactics, how do you orient them to that split?
Yeah, so the simplest way really to put it is that the strategy is the who. So thinking about who you're targeting, your audience, and I think that typically is a piece that gets missed quite often. Okay. But also thinking about the what, the where, the why of what you're sending, and then when. So when are you going to have those tactics running? When is the campaign going to launch? Your tactics is the how. That's implementing your strategy. They don't drive the strategy, but they implement it. So that tactics are really important, because without them, you wouldn't activate your marketing, you wouldn't have your strategy actually live. But they shouldn't drive the strategic plan. And that's where there's a misunderstanding, where tactics are chosen before we even think about the audience. We think about when we're going to send something, why we're sending it. And that's all chosen too early on, before we think about the actual strategic part of why we're doing what we're doing and how we're going to do it.
Okay. So cart before the horse, probably shiny toy before battle, before playing field inversion. Do you take that as far back as strategy, who, what, when, should guide even choice of channel? Look, for this audience, for this thing you're trying to get across, this may not be, email may not be, email, for example, may not be the best way to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
really starting with looking at what that wider scenario looks like, what that wider context look like. So actually starting with what is the strengths of the business?
Mhm.
What are our limitations?
Mhm.
What can we or can we not do? There might be budget or resourcing limitations.
Mhm.
And then looking at the wider external context as well, because you might have objectives that actually are just really unachievable given what's happening outside of the organization, yet we
Yeah.
never really assess that,
Yeah.
and normally gets missed. And then thinking about the targets, so setting those objectives and making sure they're really clear, and then actually thinking about your audience. So who are they? The number of times I sat in meetings and asked, who is your customer? Well, we think that this person over here, and but actually I really like this, maybe we should go down this route. We as marketers are not the customer.
Right.
We are so far removed from the customer. We're in our own, where we have a completely different environment as marketers. So and then thinking about the tactical part. So you have all these other pieces feeding in first before you even think about what channel you're going to use, because like you've just said there, your audience might not even be using email. I'm sure they will be, but they might not be.
Might not be.
Or it might be that actually you need to think about a wider mix and not just focus everything in one area, and think about what that split's going to be across the marketing channels.
Okay. I'm over the years in reading way too many Random Samples books, I've tracked where the word strategy entered the business vocabulary. If memory serves, I think it was actually McKinsey that sort of dragged it out of the military domain and moved it into the business domain. And it's used widely, but awfully fuzzily. And I'm guessing you had to grapple with that. And that was some of the work of the book in sorting out for marketing specifically, what do we mean strategy? Because it's easy to say, but if you don't have some structure behind the word, it's just a buzzword. And obviously it's not for you. You've got some, here, I'll read one of the compliments. This book is a must for anyone needing to develop marketing strategies for their firms. Like, that's a quote from an Amazon review, 5 stars. I'm using it in all 5 of my MBA and capstone classes starting this fall, said one of your reviewers on Amazon.
Yeah,
so you clearly helped them sort that out a bunch. Yeah. One of the things about a book is it's a grind. It's not something you do in a day.
No.
I
underestimated entirely.
What's that?
I completely underestimated the amount of time.
Yeah, needed. And work and discipline.
Yeah.
So when did you write in your daily or weekly routine? When did you work on the book?
Yeah, so for me it was mainly weekends. I run an agency. I have clients, I've got a team. I can't just take days out writing a book. So for me it was weekends and some evenings. And there might be some times when you're sat in a meeting and you think, do you know what, actually, this would be a brilliant example, and you take a note. And I try to get good at note taking. I took lots of voice notes. I found that really helped me, so I could do something, like I could be outside and not have to be typing. And spend time in the garden with the dogs and be dictating on my phone. I found that really useful. That was a good split, because when it's the weekend, you've been on your laptop all week, it's the last thing you want to be doing. You're then typing away more on your laptop. So I did that, and I spent a lot of time in my hammock, just music in, just taking notes, and really researching, thinking about things. I did lots of interviews and case studies with other people as well, because I thought it was really important to get lots of voices into the book. So it's not just my opinion on strategy, but actually this is what other marketers, other business owners are also saying that the challenges are. This is how you overcome them. This is their experience.
Uh-huh.
And so I have a lot of that feeding into the book as well. And in the book, I talk about the 10 common pitfalls at the end that
nice.
are most likely business owners or marketers will fall into or experience or try to avoid so they don't actually go through that pain.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the writing process was a real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of go through a bit of a roller coaster where you start and you think, this is brilliant. Yes, I can do this. I'm really excited.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm going to chunk it all down. And I had a like minimum word limit from the editors, from the publishers, and an absolute maximum.
Oh, did you? Wow.
So I had to sit within that.
Yeah.
And so I broke that down, and I tried to think about how many words I'd need to write within a time frame.
Yeah.
So then I had like a clear structure. Otherwise, you kind of just float along a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then it gets to a point where you kind of get halfway through and you think, okay, I'm not sure I'm going to finish this. Like, I'm not sure I can actually do this anymore. And maybe this was too much. What was I thinking? You go through this whole like self-doubt process.
Yeah.
And then you kind of go over that and you think, you know what? I'm like 70% of the way through. I've actually like written all of this. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And you get feedback from the publishers, the editors proofread it. They come back to you with comments.
Yeah.
And I was lucky that they didn't hate it. So I was like, okay, that's good, because you worry that you're going to send something and they say, what on earth is this? And you have lots of deadlines with them as well to keep you on your toes.
Oh, that helps, right?
Yeah, that helps for that extra pressure.
Yeah.
And then you kind of get to the end, and the worst part for me was putting all the references in, having all the separate tables, numbering all of that.
Yeah.
That was the worst bit for me, because it's like you feel like you're done then, and
then you've got to go back through it almost all over again, almost line for line, to find all that stuff, right?
Exactly. Right at the end of the process is the last thing you want to be doing. So yeah, that was kind of right up to the wire. And then it goes through proofing, and then you feel like, okay, I've done it. And then it's quite a long time period between finishing it and getting it printed.
Because you just hit the stands within the last week or two, right?
Yeah, so it launched in the States yesterday, was in the UK on the 5th, or UK and Europe on the 5th, yeah. So it's only been out a couple of weeks, and you get a little bit, I'm like really pleased to see the reviews, because you put it out there and then you think, oh God, imagine if everybody hates it.
Yeah. You are definitely putting something out in the world that's got a big piece of you in it, and your name attached, and that takes some bravery, jumping off the board. And
yeah, it does. Yeah, I don't think I really thought about that until now I get reviews back. But I guess for me it was, if I don't do something about this, I'll be forever frustrated. So at least now I can say, right, I've tried.
Right. Yeah.
And it is to actually see the book and have it in your hands is quite.
I was going to ask you about that. Kind of a thrill.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. I think because it's been such a long process, and also because the book was actually finished, the content was finished November, December. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a long time between then and now getting that actually launched.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird to see it and you think, I've actually written this. I've done this.
Yeah. Good. That's good for you. And a book, in contrast to blog post articles, etc. You've got to do all of that work and then wait that span of time, and then you'll start hearing back. There's none of this. There's a series of books that I started into. Actually, my son's read it as well, and I liked the first few a lot, the Temeraire books, and then they started getting kind of flabby and kind of like, what happened to the charm? And I read about the author's process. And sorry, this is my rant. She started asking her readers and fans for feedback on where she should take it next. And I was like, write the book. Don't ask them, right? J.K. Rowling didn't say, gee, what do you think? She wrote the books. And now we read them. And now we discover, now we go, wow, you set that up so well. that only when you have to get it done, when you've got deadlines and you don't have that feedback loop where you can say someone else can make this tough decision for me, I think that's probably where some of the real sparks come. How do I get this across? How do I formulate this?
Yeah, I had a few people review
Yeah.
the book in early draft stage and then a little bit later on to get their feedback. But you have to have a really clear idea in your mind of what you want that book to do, what you want it to look like, and how you want it to sound.
Yeah.
Because everybody has their own opinion,
Yeah.
and it might not necessarily be in the direction that you want it to be in.
Yep.
And that's the same when you have publishers. They will have, they come with brilliant insight and experience. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything.
Right.
I didn't agree with everything that they said, much to probably their frustration.
Yeah.
But that's the point of it, right? You're bringing your own flavor to something, your own personality.
Yeah.
And if everybody just went along with what everybody else thought, then they'd all be the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to have like that clear outline at the beginning of this is what I want it to be like, and be really strict with that. Because my book very easily could have gone down a very academic route and been very
Dry.
poor text, stuffy, and even in the language it could have been like that. And I really wanted to avoid that. So I had to be really quite strict with not only myself, but the publishers, any feedback, really think about, okay, is that actually how I want this book to be and be represented, or is it not?
Yeah. And how do you feel this stage, this point in time, book in hand? How do you feel about it, versus your vision and drive starting 3 years ago?
Yeah, I'm really happy with it. I think I've set out what I wanted to achieve.
Okay.
And it's funny because I had there must have been about 15 iterations of the front cover.
Yeah.
And to the point where I think the publishers were just, you need to just pick one. And I was really just adamant about what I wanted.
Yeah.
Not to try and challenge that or anything, but I just had such a clear idea in my mind.
Yeah.
In terms of color and everything.
Oh, good.
And I think, we got to a place where actually I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I meant. This is what I want it to look like. And I feel like that all the way through the content of the book as well.
Yeah. Good.
I'm really happy with it. The question I keep getting asked is, when's the next one? And honestly,
wow. You're like, I want a break.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I'm curious, I'm curious about the writing process a little bit. In that, we're in the digital age. Everyone's got a screen in front of them. We're all sitting in front of the screens, as you said earlier, all the time. And it's somewhat natural to think in terms of firing up fill in the blanks editor and writing in there. But not everybody wants to write with a word processor of some sort. And you just described audio work and audio notes. You just described it sitting in a hammock, which I'm guessing wasn't typing. Like how the pieces come together. What forms of writing and recording worked for what stages in the book?
Yeah, so I think for the early stages of putting together almost like the outline and the skeleton of what's going to be included, voice was really good for that. And being able to then listen back and think, actually, we could have a case study there, or I could have this person input here.
Yep.
I could expand here with more research, for example.
Yep.
And you have to be quite self-critical on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I was in my hammock, I did a mixture. So I did have my laptop. Okay. I also did a lot of printouts.
Yep.
So that I could read it as if I was the reader and then scribble all over it.
Yeah.
And I found that really quite useful. I used a really good tool called Scriver, and much better than than Word for this type of project.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good way to just break down the chapters and dip in and out and think about, right, I'm in this frame of mind today to focus on this topic in this chapter, and I'm going to input and have some notes and start there. So for me, I started with an outline.
Yeah.
And I didn't actually have the full structure of the book. I actually changed it quite late on.
That's hard. That's hard, right?
Yeah.
Pull this together, reform it. Wait a minute, I got to reword it because I didn't tell them about that reference yet, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's a bit of a nightmare changing that later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was because I really wanted to break down the word strategy and have that as the framework. And I didn't nail that until late on. And then I wanted each chapter to be about each part of the strategy.
Yeah.
So, that took a bit of maneuvering when you're trying to reference other chapters and you're trying to link everything together and just have that structure. So yeah, I did actually change that quite late on. I was originally going to have 8 chapters and I had 10. So
wow.
But it's I think it's worked out. It was for the better, I think. As much as it was a challenge to do, it was for the better. But you just, I think as you're working through it, these ideas come to you and you either flow with them or you don't. I think the challenge with when you're writing a book is it's you want to flow with the new idea, but that means a lot more work if you go with that idea.
Yeah. Or throwing out prior work, right? Yeah. Doing that painful, revision, rewrite thing and going, well, it's going to be better. So I've got to go ahead and do it. Or, now that I understand the thing, I'll rewrite it essentially. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got a lot of people involved when you're writing a book. It isn't just you on this lonely path. I had editors, I had proofreaders, I had people inputting who were contributing in terms of interviews and things like that. And I had people giving feedback and reviewing it and saying what they really thought and if there was anything they thought was missing and I had academic people, teachers review it as well and see what they thought. Yep. And they come with such a different perspective. It was really useful to have that.
Yeah.
I had lots of people feeding in, and that in itself is a challenge to coordinate.
Right. And different opinions, and ultimately you still have to make the call yourself. It's your book.
Yeah, exactly. And going back to my earlier point, you just have to be really clear on what you want it to be. But aren't you writing a book? Did you say you started one?
Yeah. The company I'm focusing most of my time on right now, Campaign Genius, is a platform to bring the real-time component of email that's been there for 20 years to life and make it useful. And I concluded that even very experienced email folks haven't the slightest damn clue how it all works. Like they just don't. It's just not in the wheelhouse. It's not in the mindset. It's not in the mental model. So I'm a good number of pages in that up and down journey that you described. I was thinking about as you were talking about the writing process and the number of people you had to corral. A decade ago, I launched a business with a partner. We were the second or third maybe company in the world to start doing what everybody now calls explainer videos. No one was doing this stuff, and we launched this company. And so we're doing projects for clients akin to agency work, right? It really was a specialized agency. And so there was a writing, directing, editing, visuals process that did involve other people. And as we went along with it, doing more of it and trying to get better at it, it became increasingly kind of a hard-nosed pain in the butt. I got to the point where script drafts back to the client's paying for it, right? A lot of money. Here's the script draft. It's a PDF. Oh, we want the Word doc. Nah, you don't get the Word doc because one, your legal guys are all frustrated writers. They'll want to weigh in on it, and none of you know how to write dialogue worth a damn. So I don't care if you don't like the way it's worded. If I miss the point, that's a different issue. But I don't want you writing the dialogue because you don't know how to do it. And I was perfectly happy being hard-nosed about it. Like, hey, that's what you're paying the studio to do. If I'm nice and you get this, kind of vague thing at the end, you're not going to be happy, and I'm certainly not going to be happy. So
That's very true. Yeah.
I mean, you have to stay the director of the show, I
Hmm.
think, and ultimately you have to say, I'm responsible for making the call, whether this point stays in, whether that structure stays in, whether that paragraph, you know, stays as is. Thanks for the input. It's my name on the cover, so
Yeah.
I'll run with what I think, right?
Yeah, totally. You have to be
Yeah.
really strict with that. You
Yeah.
really do.
And probably clear with yourself, which is not easy either, because there's a natural tendency to want, oh, well, I respect so and so, and they said, gee, it should be this way, so maybe I should change it. No, right? Not so much.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, there are. You kind of have to. You have to really like fight with yourself a little bit on that, I think, and be really decisive, because you can't. You don't have. I
Infinite
guess you
time.
don't really have the opportunity to then backtrack so much. So
Print.
like once you make a decision, that's it. You move on, and
Yeah, yeah.
this is how it's going to move forward.
And you think about the difference in the writing process now in the digital age versus paper. Tennessee Williams, Eugene O'Neill, sorry, theater background. Those guys are banging out stuff on a typewriter and pencils on a pad, respectively. Changing a character name was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like search replace done, next.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But it
Yeah.
also means when your stuff's in digital form, once you get it, if you get it to digital form, which I guess everybody does eventually now, that means you can keep screwing around with it ad infinitum. Look, I just want to go rewrite this one more time.
Yeah,
Right?
that's such a good
Death.
point. Yeah, there's never a finished version.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have
And
to fight with yourself about that. You really
yes.
do.
Yes.
Because, my book doesn't include Clubhouse, for example, as a
Right.
social media
Doesn't.
tactic.
Yeah.
No, because that only came out last month and the book was already done. So
Hmm.
there's that
What do you
challenge.
What do you think about Clubhouse as a marketer, a marketing expert?
Yeah, I found it really interesting actually, just watching the flock to Clubhouse and see where it is now today.
Yeah.
And I like to kind of sit back and just observe. I'm really, I'm a strategist at heart, so I really like to see what people's perception and reactions are.
Mhm.
And I follow a lot of marketers on Twitter, and there's a lot of discussion saying, and I thought it was a very good point, that Clubhouse is more of a feature than it is an individual platform. And you have Twitter Spaces, I have Facebook are also starting to do something, and Instagram, you've got Instagram Stories, which is fairly similar, but you obviously can't do that for as long a time period as you can on Clubhouse.
Mhm.
So really, as Clubhouse just paved the way, that actually now people really like to have this live interaction, just voice only,
Mhm.
and do it on all the existing social media platforms,
Mhm.
potentially.
Start. So audio akin to Clubhouse, you expect to see in other places, and I know it's happening already. Twitter's got their, let's call it a knockoff, if you want, but it's showing up other places. That's your point about a feature, right?
Yeah, I think it is more of a feature. I think it was a really good point. I can't remember who said it, so I can't credit them, but I thought it was a really, really good observation, a really good point. It is more of a feature, and it was very interesting that Clubhouse decided to only open it up to Apple users to begin with.
Yeah, that was an interesting call.
Yeah.
More than a few people I talked with who don't happen to be Apple guys were like, "Yeah, not going right. Can't go there. Not going to go there."
Yeah, which is, it's an interesting place to start. And I think the other part with it, which I find really fascinating, is just the investment and the valuation given to that piece of technology so early on.
Yeah, so early on.
And then when you look at it now and its users are dropping off a cliff,
Yeah.
is it a case that actually that investment is also very tactically driven? It's not very strategic.
Yeah, I do wonder. I mean, I'm guessing you weren't in the thick of things in the .com boom. I was. I've got gray on the temples here, right? And it looks even dumber now than then. like goofy, frothy money being thrown at asinine. There's no plan here. There's no strategy here.
Yeah.
It's just got some sizzle, and you're gonna throw. It's got what valuation? Oh man, this is dumb. This is not going to end well.
Yeah, it's crazy because that's just something that has consistently happened
Yeah, yeah,
pre-COVID and
yeah,
still happens now.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, you see it every day. And I've worked with some companies, and it's unbelievable that, you know, their competitors have got investment. It
yeah,
really is. Like, they don't even have a clear business plan, or they
yeah.
don't
They don't even
have,
have clip lists. Yeah,
they just
yeah,
don't have anything. And you think, how on earth has this even
yeah.
happened?
Well, and it really, that relatively ready availability of capital makes for a goofy playing field because the guy armed with a big enough bag of sticks can run around hitting everybody without worrying about paying for the sticks. And if you're competing with them, like yeah, you're right, can't afford to go there even if we've got a better widget or better thought through offering or whatever else. So it's going to kill some really potentially viable things because the inferior one was better funded.
Yeah, which you would think wasn't the case. I would have thought that would have been more sophisticated by now. And
Yeah.
so I'm just, yeah, I was amazed at the evaluation of Clubhouse. I really was. How quick and how soon on. And so, like,
Yeah.
just watching the whole story of Clubhouse is an interesting one, and marketers flocking to it
Yeah.
without thinking about whether or not their audience would be there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
For me, it was just like, the strategy is not here. We've just literally chased after another shiny toy and
Yes.
another shiny tactic.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I was intrigued, just intellectually intrigued, with the core thesis of leaving a lot of things out, right? Like, what, voice only? No, like no visuals. It's a live conversation. Wow, not recorded. Huh? It's like conversation. What a great idea, right?
Who would
Um,
have thought?
who'd have thought? And I was talking with Gene Jennings, who I'm sure is a friend of yours as well. Gene actually got me a Clubhouse invite to talk about a project that we were both involved in. But she said, "Yeah, I've kind of dropped off, but so and so started on it, and they spend hours a day on Clubhouse." And I'm like, "Wow, I don't think I could do that. I really don't think
No,
I could do that."
it's really not for me. I don't think it
No.
really isn't.
Right, which is, I mean, that's a personal preference thing. I guess one of the points I'm driving at there, specific to Clubhouse and the voice thing, is that the time commitment doesn't get shortened. If you sign up to listen to a half an hour conversation, you can't really skim that live conversation. Either you're there for the half an hour or you punch out early and you're not there and you miss whatever you did, versus written material, visual material. We're all guilty of it, right? Oh, yeah, I read that. No, you didn't. You just skimmed down the page,
You
right?
skip through.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
skip through, got the highlights, chapter headings, blah blah blah, and that deliberate push people into live conversation, audio only, is was refreshingly counter. Even though mea culpa, like, yeah, I don't have time and interest for what someone might or might not say for a half an hour, because a half an hour is pretty precious.
Yeah, I wonder if, we were talking earlier about the educational industry. I think maybe that has an opportunity there for that type of setup.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, you back away and look at education. We were talking about the push the pandemic gave to go online. We had alternative digital platforms for education, coming and going like fruit flies over the last decade, right? MOOCs, um, and the cold hard fact was the completion rate was dismal, right? People sign up for a course and they don't bother going through the course, right? People pay for a course and they don't bother finishing the course. And same mechanisms, right? Video, audio, whatever else. So there's more to it than just the content being there and accessible. And I
Yeah.
don't know an answer beyond that, but I think we'll have to keep experimenting with um, the carrots and the sticks involved. Well, it's not unlike reading a book, right? All right, someone's going to sit down with your book, and there's going to be a percentage of readers. I'm sure a higher percentage of readers who finish it for yours, and there's going to be a percentage who are like, "Oh yeah, I didn't get back to it, or I just skimmed
Yeah,
the
of
chapter headings."
course.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's human nature, isn't it?
that's human
That's
nature.
just, yeah. And, I've done that with lots of
We all have.
books.
We all have. Yeah, we all have. And I find it easier. I'm curious your take on this. Um, avid reader. Tons of ebooks. Far prefer paper books. How about you?
Yeah, I do prefer a paper book, but I have, because they actually stopped deliveries here during COVID. I had to go digital.
You had to go digital, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So now I do read a lot more digital, but I prefer the physical book.
Yeah, yeah. It's a funny touch. Like I've got my Kindle account on, I don't know, 42 devices. And I love the fact that the whole library is with me. Even if I walk out of the house with just my phone in my pocket, I'm like, yeah, I got, a lot of books. But I don't finish them as much as the paper books.
Yeah, no, I think because it's always there.
Yeah, yeah,
It's always accessible.
yeah,
There's no kind of prompt or urgency to read it. Whereas if it's like an actual physical book is sat in front of you, you think, oh, I'm going to pick that. I'm going to start reading that now.
yeah, yeah. Or if if you're guilty of putting them face down to mark your place, which I would never do. The book is sitting there saying, "Hey, you're not finished with me yet, right? Physical me, I'm sitting right here telling you you're only halfway through, dummy."
Yeah, exactly. And like we were saying before, we spend a lot of time at screens. So for me, it was a good switch off to have that physical book and not look at a screen.
Yeah. Well, so we've managed to go almost 45 minutes and not talk about email at all, which is
Yeah.
kind of rocking in a way. As you were working through, strategy and emails down there in the tactics bucket, did you find yourself changing your thinking about email substantially?
No.
Interesting. Expand on that.
Yeah. So I was going to leave that there. No. No, I didn't. Because I always, at my company, it's called Let's Talk Strategy. We always come in at the strategic angle,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what channel the client is particularly looking at optimizing. We always want to know what are the objectives of the business, what are you trying to achieve here, who's your audience, and getting really like under the bonnet and really understanding what's happening, what's doing audits and so on. And in the book, I talk about 4 key areas of email. And the 4 key areas of focus, but I also talk about the history of the tactics as well, because I feel that's a piece that we don't necessarily think about: the history of SEO, the history of PR, the history of PPC, the history of email and where it's come from and where it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot about that you can take a lot of learnings from in terms of its adoption, how it's being used, but also the opportunities of what else it could do.
Yep.
Based on that history piece. So I think for me, that was how I looked at tactics differently, was to assess that and really research and actually learn quite a lot myself there about the history of different tactics.
Nice.
But I think the 4 fundamentals of email remain the same, and they are still, in a sense, strategic. You still need that strategic plan and the objectives before you can choose the channel. And even if you're looking at email, you still need to have that. So really thinking about, how are you actually going to get your email seen in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much that goes into that, like deliverability, DMARC and so on. The not so sexy pieces that people don't really want to spend loads of time on, are the core foundations of what you really need to do just to get your email up and running in an effective way, and actually going back and checking those things as well and making sure you have that process in place. But then also thinking about, how you're going to get your audience to even open your emails.
Right.
What is that value on what you're sending? And really thinking about the audience there, less about, okay, we've got this product to promote and sell.
Yeah.
Okay, well, your customer might really love it, they might not, and you might have already sent this to them already. So what now can you say that's going to make them open that email and engage with it?
Yep.
I'm thinking about the engagement piece, and then also thinking about reporting, which is a piece that I think is typically either email marketing teams are typically under-resourced, they lack time.
Yeah.
So reporting is kind of done either really, really quickly and there's no insights gleaned from it, or it's not done at all. And there's a lot of insights that can come from that reporting piece to input into the next campaign that you send and the journeys that you're also sending.
Yeah. I'm curious your opinion on this, because I'm just nodding my head. If someone's listening to a podcast, I'm just nodding my head and going, yep. Write that down. It seems to me from looking at the tools of the trade that email marketers are frequently either guilty of or trapped into using that data that comes back in a fairly tactical way. I see a lot of metrics about campaigns, but I don't see a lot of metrics about people. Mm-hmm. And back to your who, what, when, strategies, like this percentage of folks really don't want to hear about this topic, or they don't want, right, because they don't respond to it, or they unsubscribe or whatever else. But if you're just looking at campaign metrics and not grafting those back into your view of the customer, how do you get out of that sort of tactical only cycle and tactical only thinking?
Yeah, that's a real challenge. I mean, there's a couple of things that the culture of the business can have a big play there. Mm-hmm. Because if the marketing team are getting really pushed to deliver on sales repeatedly each week, we've all been there, and that can be a real challenge to get out of that cycle.
Yeah.
And you have to have a culture in the business where they're open to taking some risk, because when you try to come out of that type of cycle, there will be some fallout from that temporarily, and the business has to have the appetite for that, and most businesses don't. They don't have that appetite, so it creates a real challenge for the marketing team to get out of that tactical cycle. Businesses that do have that culture and they do have that bit of appetite for change, and they can see that there's an opportunity there to do things in a better way, then it gives the opportunity for the marketing team to be more strategic, because most marketers actually want to be able to move away from the ad hoc rushing around.
I'm sure
every day something's changing, and they want to go to the more structured and planned. Not to say that everything will be like that, but to have a bit of a more of a 70-30% split of planned versus ad hoc, rather than 90% split of everything being ad hoc.
Constant gerbil wheel, right?
And the team gets burnt out, they get unmotivated, they start to question, why am I even doing marketing? It's just the same. It creates a real negative environment, and it burns out marketing teams. Burns really
out. And you've worked with a lot of email marketing teams, a lot more than I have. Would I be correct in my guess that email marketers or the email team is sort of particularly subject to getting stuck on that hamster wheel?
Yeah, I think so. I think historically, and still a little bit today, email's seen as, and was very much used a couple of years ago, for batch and blast repeatedly. And if we send an email, we will make some money, so let's just send another email.
Right.
And it's a cheap channel in comparison to the other digital channels.
Right.
And it performs.
Right.
So there's that real kind of balance there to actually see that, yes, it might be a cheaper channel, but actually you're going to see a massive burn rate on your subscribers if you continue with that approach. And we actually worked with a retailer that wanted to come out of this cycle of constantly sending sales messages. We used to send a sales message every other day. It was a lot.
Wow. And
they were trying to convince the board that, look, if we keep doing this, we're going to lose our subscribers. We're going to not have the email marketing subscribers anymore. And we conducted an analysis to see what was the engagement rate from when they initially signed up. So we could go back 2 years to today, and then how many emails have they received between that? What did they look like? How many sales messages have they received? And then what was that drop-off rate looking like in terms of engagement? And after 6 months of someone being subscribed, their engagement dropped by more than 50%. So if they continued for another 6 months, that person would be gone.
Yeah.
Probably lost them already from opening ever again and engaging with their email.
Yeah.
So there's a real, once the board saw that, they were like, okay, yeah, we need to change this. Like, we're going to lose everybody. And they could appreciate that.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so you were able to re-articulate, it may be cheap in terms of one kind of cost, but if you treat your customer relationship as economic term, externality, it's actually not cheap, right?
Yeah.
That burning through the list is going to cost you potentially everything. Whereas treating that relationship building as the asset, as the more valuable piece of the equation, pays off better.
Exactly. And there's lots of conversations at the moment about if Facebook changed their rules tomorrow, you'd lose all those fans.
Yes.
If email marketing changed its rules, you're in more control of that data. You have consent for that data and so on. And businesses now are valued based on the engagement rate of their email subscribers, not the number of fans that they have on Facebook.
Thank goodness.
So that in itself is a massive value asset to a business.
Yeah.
And that changes the whole conversation of how email is used in a company once the rest of the business view it in that way.
Yeah, I think the more marketing departments, read your book and take your advice. Frankly, the more value they're gonna get out of their marketing efforts, and maybe the slightly easier job, not easier, better job their email marketers would be able to do, because they're thinking long term and strategically, not just hamster wheel tactically.
Yeah, it makes having that budget conversation, getting more resource, trying to get a new piece of technology much easier if you're aligned to what the business objectives are, and you can actually demonstrate how email has contributed towards that.
Right.
The challenge is that when you're very tactically driven and you haven't got that strategy, you can't do that, and you can just show an open rate. Or to a business, okay, well, how much is that worth?
Yeah.
That you have to change that conversation, the language based on the stakeholders you're talking to, because the finance director is not going to care less how many people opened your email.
Right.
They're going to want to know, okay, what is the value of a single email subscriber? What's their lifetime value?
Right.
How much are they bringing to the business? What are they contributing?
Yeah.
And without that strategic element, that's missing entirely in that conversation. I think that's why email has typically been, and what has actually prompted my interest to get involved in email in the first place, has typically been the channel that's been delivering but just hidden in the corner,
right?
And not the one that's been center stage like PPC and SEO and had all that budget. And it's because that type of information is missing from those conversations.
Boy, it's a really good perspective. So if there's hardworking email marketing team listening, saying, okay, how do we change this inside our company? What kind of advice do you have for them?
Keep going, number one.
Hey.
Hang in there. Email's an amazing community of people that all help each other.
Yes.
And there's lots of different groups on lots of different types of platforms and channels actually. That are there to support each other. So if you find yourself that you're in a situation where you don't know where to turn or what that conversation needs to be, then there's people to help. Number one, I think to really try and understand what the business objectives are and how email can help support those. So translating those business objectives into email marketing objectives is a really good starting point, because then you can start to have that conversation of, okay, this is what we've delivered. If you find that actually the business objectives aren't that clear, then that opens up another conversation, and actually would be important for the rest of the marketing department to understand that as well.
Right.
But also speaking to the rest of your teams, if you have somebody who might be responsible for paid search or paid social, for example, speaking to them as well and talking about their reporting. What are they looking at? Because, someone who's managing PPC is going to be looking at cost per acquisition, They're
Yeah.
going to be looking at a lot more numbers in terms of monetary numbers than we
Yeah.
probably are in email.
Yeah.
And there'll be some insights from them that you'll be able to glean and put into your email marketing and vice versa.
Yeah.
And they'll be able to help you get that type of format and structure into your email reporting.
And you're talking about the same customers in the long run. So
Yeah.
you should be working together as much as possible.
Yeah, and hopefully you already are, but there are still instances where there's lots of silos.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately.
Plenty. There was I can't remember if it's from that book, but there's a business book that was popular like 20 years ago. Harvey Mackay, How to Swim with the Sharks Without Being Eaten Alive. And it may have been McKay who said your receptionist is actually your VP of first impressions. And this is back in the physical office days, right? Email marketing team is in a mighty, mighty critical position in terms of your long-term relationship with your market, right? If they're not paying attention to that, or if they're being pushed to just burn through it, right? Not good.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you make that point, actually, because we've had this conversation with quite a few clients. When you compare what an email subscriber's perception would be of a brand based on what they're receiving in comparison to what they might be seeing on social or on your website.
Right.
If email's being used as just a sales channel all the time, well, you're going to look like you're a discount. Mm-hmm. You're always on discount. You're always having an offer. Whereas on your website, you might not talk at all about offers. It might be completely hidden. And so that perception is completely different.
Yeah.
Completely different. And it's interesting that quite a lot of businesses don't actually even think about that.
Yeah.
They don't think about that perception that an email recipient might have in comparison to a website visitor who may not be an email subscriber.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's like if you're not taking that sort of chief customer officer view of the whole and just treating it as a turn and burn channel, ouch. I've probably been guilty of bringing this story up more than once, but there's a outdoor retailer in the U.S. that I've bought thousands of dollars worth of stuff from over a decade, and I'm on their email list because they have the kind of stuff I like. Their prices are fantastic. Blah blah blah. They still don't know me from Adam. They still send me stuff that's completely irrelevant. I'm like, what do I have to do to get you to narrow it down and go, oh yeah, he always gets that. Like my categories are very, very well established somewhere in their data set, but they're completely oblivious to them. And I put up with it for whatever reason, but I'm thinking missed opportunity, real big missed opportunity.
Yeah, massively. There probably is a challenge with data there. I think it's still, having systems talking to each other, being able to crunch the numbers and actually connect the dots is still a massive challenge for
we think we've gotten so far along in the world of data with our data warehouses and whatnot. It's like still some poor guy trying to work through a SQL query going, God, I'll never get this done, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but then that's where the likes of having AI, machine learning, and using those as email marketing assistants or marketing assistants can really solve that problem.
I hesitate to bring them up because it's not my favorite company in the world. But when you look at the data job that Facebook does, I don't log into Facebook, but if I did, it would be a unique experience all built around me instantaneously for that moment in time. It's like, wow, they're doing that with billions of people. And we're all sitting here caterwauling about what we can do with, a list of 100,000 or 200,000 or something like that. That's a little embarrassing, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I think there's rumors about Facebook trying to get into the email field, isn't there?
Let's hope not. I'm happy to help discourage that in my own humble way.
I mean, it is. It's a very sophisticated way of how they've created that. It really shows the potential.
It shows that they're well put. Yeah, that's it. It shows the potential. We're not near doing that even with the absolute best case, email platforms. I don't think we're even near that level of granularity and performance and sophistication could be, will be, maybe, but we're not there yet. And I think we may have to think a bit differently to get there.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how cookies and
Yeah.
all of that side of things changes that.
Yeah, death of the third party cookie, flock. Are you an iPhone or an Android user?
iPhone.
Yeah, me as well. A little pop up saying, "Do you want this app to do?" I'm like, "No,
Well,
no,
is that, yeah,
no."
what's the value in me doing that? I know
Right.
exactly, and that it's going to be an interesting space to see that what happens there, because I've seen it. I think the majority of people are declining
I think so too. Yeah,
at
I think so.
tracking.
I think so too. And it's probably long overdue. It's the unanticipated ragged edge of the digital frontier turns out to be our privacy, and now we're lagging in the U.S. for sure, but we're starting to get there on a global scale. And some of the companies that benefited from the fuzziness of that are going to take a shot on the chin, which I'm fine with. It's like, it's my data, not yours.
Yeah, it's interesting what the general public's feeling is on privacy and how much they're willing to give away.
What do you
Maybe
think?
unknowingly so, I think has probably been the case.
Yeah.
But it's just amazing, like when you mentioned Facebook there, on the how many breaches and privacy concerns have been raised, yet they still have millions of people log into
Billions.
that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, we're voluntarily going. My best friend in the world he spends way too much time on Facebook. I'm like, do you realize
Yeah, exactly.
how much every one of those post this, do that? Like, oh man, do they have your number? Yeah, he'll buy a golf club, no problem. Just do that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I know and that fascinates me as well. I'm not a Facebook user, and I'm debating about WhatsApp because they've changed the rules on that as well.
Right, aggressively change the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
you have
now it's
to opt
popping
into
up.
this, or we'll cut your account off eventually, right?
Well, supposedly, but I don't know if they're actually allowed to do that. I think it's still being debated in Europe in terms of
Good.
whether or not they can really enforce it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I have the pop-up every time I go in, but I still haven't accepted.
Interesting.
But I know, but it's like, do you my own personal experience there is, okay, I'm not happy about it at all.
Mhm.
And if I take myself out of this and I'm no longer part of WhatsApp, am I then going to lose all those connections that I've got in there?
Yeah.
So
Viable question.
that's then the trade-off.
Yeah. Very, very viable question, and not like there's a guidebook for the decision, right? You've got
No.
millions and billions of people kind of going, why do I keep getting asked this question? And with a long contract, I don't know. Yes, no. And then, companies like Apple being in control of that, where Apple controls that dialogue for apps now, and it's specific in what it says and how it says it. Like, in some ways helpful, but if you start looking at the fine print, it leaves them in one heck of a position as an advertiser. So it's not 100% sweet.
Yeah, I know. And should they be the gatekeeper?
Should they be the gatekeeper? Yeah.
Should it not be an independent organization? I think the challenge is that there is no independent.
There is no independent. Yeah. Who watches the watcher? There's a writer named Ben Thompson who I'm a huge fan of. Stratechery, fantastic newsletter. I subscribe. I pay happily. Go Ben. But he said, if we're going to, he was talking in terms of fact, not in terms of privacy, but let's put them in the same terrain for a minute. He said, if we're going to run the experiment of saying someone's in charge of fact and truth, that experiment's already being run. A country called China. Do you want to do that?
Yeah,
Right. It's a very different way of looking at things, and it may not suit who we want to define ourselves as being in our different nations. But for sure, handing it over to private companies is, I think we're reaching a, wait a minute, is that a good idea? Kind of endpoint for that.
Yeah, and China's really interesting. That my husband travels there, or was traveling there a lot with work.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing the extent that people will go to be able to use the likes of Gmail,
right,
the likes of Facebook.
Yeah. And email's not that popular.
No,
it's not a given.
It's all WeChat.
Yeah. It's all
Yeah.
WeChat. Yeah, yeah,
And the
exactly.
rules on WeChat is unbelievable for authentication
Yeah,
and checking you are who you say you are.
yep, yep, yep.
Um, really is quite amazing, but it's also amazing to see human behavior try to go outside of those rules and have different VPNs and all of that going on. And they've actually blocked different VPN companies
Yes,
to stop people
yes,
from going outside the rules.
yeah, yeah,
So it's
yeah.
yeah, it's completely different
Yeah,
world.
that would be one heck of a seminar discussion to get a group to tackle that. But to be intellectually fair, I'd want to have someone who, lives inside that system, that nation, that culture say, no, here's why I'm part of this. Here's what I think's beneficial about it. Because I'm going to be on the other side going, oh, no way could I stand that. But that's me, right? That
Yeah,
would be you.
but we've known no different as
We know no
well.
different.
So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We really
yeah,
have. Yeah,
we've
it's a
got more
big vote.
freedom in that respect
We
for those
do.
types of areas.
I knew this was going to happen. I'm like, Jenna and I are going to chew up way more than half an hour, and I'd apologize, except it's been so darn much fun
Yeah,
to
it has been great talking
read
to
and
you.
learn from you as well. So we should probably wrap it up and let you get on with your evening there in Lisbon, land of wonderful wines. I had a friend who was a Portuguese wine importer. I'm like, ooh, that's very very good stuff there.
Really good wine.
Yeah, really good wine. So we'll wrap it up there. My guest has been Jenna Tiffany, and you can find her book Marketing Strategy on Amazon, at least in both the UK and the US. Any other places someone might go look for that, because we don't want to just push business to another monopoly.
Yeah, it's available in all good bookstores. In the States, it's in Target, Walmart, everywhere.
And you did a hardback version as well, I noticed, on the listing.
Yeah, so it's Kindle, paperback, and a hardback
In
as
a
well.
hardback, that's I love hardbacks. I'm increasingly hoarding them because they last and they feel great. And like we were talking about, you finish them more and stuff like that. So I'm gonna get the hardback version of your book, and then someday I'll get you to autograph it live.
Yeah,
Jenna, thank
definitely.
you so much for the time. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
And gee, thanks so much for having me.